I'm here with Jason Adkins. Jason, you're the Executive Director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference. How long have you been in that role?
I've been in that role 12 years. We are the public policy voice of the Catholic Church in Minnesota. So we bring the legislative initiatives and priorities of the Minnesota bishops to the Capitol. We inform legislators about key issues impacting life and human dignity. And then we help mobilize the Catholic faithful to help them be faithful citizens and make their voice heard in the public arena.
You talk about mobilize. So I think having people come to the Capitol, having people getting involved in the process, some people are a little allergic to that. What would you say to them?
Well, it's part of our right and our responsibility as citizens. We have a government of, by, and for the people. And so our elected officials need us as resources to help inform them about what the important issues are and what they should do about key questions impacting life, human dignity, and the common good. So we can't expect our legislators to know everything about every issue, and they rely on citizens, they rely on their constituents to help inform them about what they should do at the Capitol. That's why we have representative government. They are representing us as citizens. You might not agree with them in every instance, but if you want them representing your views, then you need to speak with them about what are those positions that they should hold and how they should vote on key legislative items. So
because I suppose the danger would be that, for example, if you have a legislator and you think they don't agree with you, that person may be living in a bubble. They're not hearing from people like you.
That's exactly right. I mean, we fall into the trap of assuming because someone has an R or a D next to their name that we know what they think about every issue. Legislators are people just like us, and that's why it's important that people go and talk to their legislators at the Capitol in their district, because you learn that they're people, they have concerns. You can't assume how they're going to vote on every issue, and they need your perspective. Legislators come into their role with a few key priorities, and on the rest of the issues, they look to their caucus, they look to their party, but also, most importantly, they look to their constituents, because their constituents are the ones who put them in office. A fun fact is that a legislator, when they get about 5 or 10 messages about an issue, they understand and assume that 50 to 100 people care about that issue in their district. And 50 or 100 people in their district who care about an issue is enough to sway an election. So they're going to be really, really attentive, even if a small vocal group talks to them about a specific thing. So it's very, very important that people show up at the Capitol, that they contact their legislators in their district, they set up meetings on Saturday mornings at McDonald's, whatever. It's important to be in relationship and serve as a resource to our elected officials.
So Jason, people are coming in today and throughout the session to meet with legislators. Tell me a little bit of the logistics. How do you do that?
Well, the easiest way, of course, is to telephone the legislator and talk to his or her legislative assistant and set up a meeting. You can do that here at the Capitol, but you can also do it in the district anytime, and they're more than willing to meet with you. People think, oh, I can't meet with them, they're too busy. They want to meet with you, they expect to meet with you, and they want to hear from you and your perspective. So make a phone call, send an email, try to set up a meeting, but be flexible as well, given the demands on a legislator's time.
So meeting with them in St. Paul, that's incredibly important. But if for far-flung districts, it's important to know that during the rest of the year, those people are probably just a couple miles away and easier to get to potentially.
That's exactly right. And they, like I said, they want to hear from you. Get a group of people together and set up a meeting on a Saturday morning at a coffee shop. Legislators also have town halls and monitor, and when those are, get on your legislator's email list and then show up at those. And that's a great way to ask questions and hear from them about what they're working on as well.
If you have a legislator who is, they or the LA is not getting back to you, what are some tips for trying to grease the wheels?
Well, I mean, coming to the Capitol, understanding where their schedule is when they're in committee, and then showing up at the Capitol, whether they're on the floor or in a committee meeting, you can put in a note, say, hey, I'm a constituent, I'm here to talk with you about a specific issue, can you give me 5 minutes of your time? And very often they'll come out. So if you really want to speak with them, show up. Again, showing up is what makes all the difference, but then, or sending them a letter or an email just saying, here's my concern, and more often than not, they'll get back to you. Yes, they are busy, but they make time for constituents.
So you've done that successfully. You have the meeting. You're going into their office. What does a successful meeting look like?
Well, I think starting is to recognize that they are a person. Make a human connection. Go in and try to understand who they are. And what's their background. What do they care about? Maybe there's a common interest. Maybe there's a common connection. We're all from small community. So our legislative districts are relatively small, so inevitably someone knows someone. So try to make that human connection. The second thing I'd say is make sure that you have an ask of the legislator. They expect you to ask them to do something. So oftentimes people come into a legislative meeting and they talk about an issue, but they don't actually tell the legislator what to do and what they want them to do. Mm-hmm. So I would just really, really encourage people to come in, make a human connection, say, hey, I'm here to talk about House File 91. I'm hoping you'll vote against House File 91, and here's why. So don't bury the lead, say it right up front, say why you're there, and then make your case. And again, it doesn't have to be, a case that a professor would make. You just have to show up and tell them what you want them to do. That's what they're looking to hear. So make sure you make an ask of the legislator.
Makes sense. So you come in, you make a human connection, you're respectful, and you make a specific ask. Please vote no on this bill. Please vote yes on this bill. What are some other do's and don'ts?
Well, I think first of all, you wait for their response, and then maybe they'll say, yes, I can do that. No, I can't. Okay, well then and you're not always going to agree or you're not always going to disagree. Oftentimes, though, the legislator will say, I'll keep it in mind. Then you make sure you want to follow up with that legislator. Hey, I'm grateful for our conversation. Just checking in to see where you're at with this issue. Here are a few more data points for you to consider. So follow-up is good, but then carry on a regular relationship, because inevitably there are going to be more issues about which you want to speak to your legislator. Carry on a respectful dialogue with that elected official. But again, I'm going back to your point about do's and don'ts. Don't make demands, make appeals. I think that's the number one thing. And then be thankful. Have an attitude of gratitude. They've given you some of their time. They've listened respectfully to you. And be thankful, give them your thanks, and let them know you're praying for them. I think that's really important, because most of the folks who are attending this event are people of faith. Let them know they want and need your prayers, and that's one of the most important things we can do for our elected officials. So let them know that you're there as a resource, that you're there as a friend. We talk about civic friendship, people walking together toward the good, but then also as a resource and an asset to them. Be an asset to your elected officials. That's really, really important.
Excellent. So that speaks to the importance of an event like today's event, United for Life, where hundreds of people from across the state are coming in. And I would think that an in-person meeting with a legislator would be, 5-10 times better than an email?
It makes an impact when a person takes the time to come down to the Capitol to meet with an elected official, especially when you live in the far corners of the state. To make that trip, to be a part of a group of people who care about and are passionate about issues, really makes an impact on legislators. It is the most important way you can contact and be in touch with your legislators. Go visit them in person and have a conversation about issues that matter to you.
I think you're making a great case, but I think people still might be perhaps a little bit intimidated. Do people need to have an expert level of knowledge to come in and talk with their legislators?
So there's a lot of the barriers to participation in politics and public life. People don't know what to say, they don't know when to say it, they don't know how to say it, and they're so concerned about those things. Understandably, it's always best to be informed about an issue so you can make a compelling and cogent case for that issue or for that public policy position. But you don't have to be, and legislators don't expect you to be super informed, super up, not know every nut and bolt about every issue. That's why professional lobbyists exist, to close some of those information gaps. But what's most important is simply showing up. Showing up and sharing your heartfelt position on issues, even if you don't have all the best arguments, that makes all the difference in the world. And that's what they're really looking for, is who's showing up, who cares about this? How many people in my district actually care about that issue? So showing up is the most important thing we can do, even if we don't always have the right thing to say.
Mm-hmm. And talking about what to say, when you have a meeting with a legislator, when you're talking to them, what should your tone be? I mean, respectful, that's easy to say, but what does that look like in your view?
I think a lot of people fall into the trap in these legislative meetings that they demand things as though they're entitled to have the legislator agree with them on every issue. We want the legislator to agree with us, but the better way is to make appeals and not demands. There's an old story about truth, and it's like a precious gem, and when you hold it out in your hand, it's attractive to people, and people take it. But you can take that same gem and you can hurl it at someone, and then it causes pain and pushes people away. So I think that's the big difference here, is we can be armed with truth, and truth is important, but tone matters, and that's a big thing, because the way people receive information is how they want to receive it. And if you're going to be demanding things, if you're going to be disrespectful, people are not going to be able to receive truth as effectively. So there's a lot of folks who have what I call John the Baptist syndrome out there. We have plenty of John the Baptists, but we need to be able to speak truth effectively and with love at the same time. And that's going to be compelling as well, not just having the right principles or the right positions, but tone really makes a big difference.
So I think it's easy for people to lose that perspective when we come to the issues of life and human dignity, especially with the assault on those things that we've seen in Minnesota and in some other states this year. I wonder if you can apply that specifically to the issues we're talking about today, life and human dignity. So you're talking about tone, and I think that's really important with the issue of life, because we've had so many assaults on that issue coming from our legislators this season. So people might be coming to the legislature and they might feel angry. So how do you want people to talk about life and human dignity specifically with their legislators?
Well, we have to start with the right principles, and then we have to speak about them effectively, and then we have to speak about them with the right tone. So we have to passionately demonstrate truth, as the old saying goes. But again, doing it in an effective way, and understand that if I'm feeling angry and passionate about something, most likely the legislator has passionate convictions about these issues too. Everyone's got an opinion about the life issues, but we also have to recognize they're deeply personal questions. 70 million abortions, almost 70 million abortions have taken place in this country since Roe v. Wade. It's an issue that's impacted everybody in many ways. Very few people have escaped its impact in some form or another. So we have to recognize that is a real personal dynamic for people and understand that. And I think the key thing is to remember that we have to start with what I call our primary identities in life, and not view ourselves or our opponents as pro-life or pro-choice, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, Christian, non-Christian. We're all fundamentally children of God. We are children of the one Father, regardless if we're professing Christ or not. And we have to understand ourselves in that light as children of the one Father, but then also our elected officials as children of the one Father, our brothers and sisters, and not just members of the body of Christ, but also potential members of the body of Christ. And so how we speak to them about important issues really, really matters. But we also want to keep in mind that this is a serious issue of moral gravity, and it's therefore all the more important that we go and talk to our elected officials about these key things and make sure that they know that Minnesotans are deeply uncomfortable with making Minnesota a state with abortion on demand.
Minnesota Catholic Conference is one of the main organizers and sponsors of today's event. If people are just hearing about you for the first time, where can they get more information?
We have a plethora of resources that people can use and find on our website. mncatholic.org is the easiest way, mncatholic.org. There we have the Catholic Advocacy Network, where, again, closing that information gap about what to say, when to say, and how to say it. If you sign up for the Catholic Advocacy Network, you can get messages about key issues of legislation, and with a click of the mouse, you can personalize and send those to your elected officials. I know Minnesota Family Council does similar things on a lot of similar issues, but again, being a part of one of those networks is one of the easiest ways to stay involved. That's the lowest level of intensity, we like to say, but it's something. It's more than a lot of people are doing. Of course, the best way is to try to meet with your elected official directly. Handwritten letters are even better than emails as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Jason Adkins, Executive Director, Minnesota Catholic Conference, thank you so much.
Thank you, Moses.
Teresa, it is wonderful to have you here with us to share about how you have worked on the life issue for so long, to tell us about your journey, not only as a professor, but as a litigator, as someone who's testified in Congress. So those are some things we can talk about today. But first, tell us about what you're doing now. You're at the University of St. Thomas, directing the Pro-Life Center. I'd love to hear more about the work of the Pro-Life Center and help other people that are watching this video understand more about the important work that you're doing at the university.
Well, Renee, I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I've got to say, for anybody viewing this, that Renee is one of our most talented graduates, that she has had already at her young age a distinguished career in public policy and in law, and we are blessed by the efforts that she's making. And we've actually worked together. We worked together recently on a brief to the United States Supreme Court on behalf of advancing American values, and that former Vice President Pence founded in order to really fight for the things that Americans care about. And the brief talked about the context of Roe v. Wade and how it has led to the unraveling of the family and a lot of other important issues, the unraveling of romantic relationships between men and women. And all of that is collateral damage to the fact that we've literally lost millions of tiny children to the scourge of abortion. So it's great to be with you today. It's great to continue to collaborate with you. At the Pro-Life Center, that is in fact what we are chartered to do. We are a university-approved center. The university provides no resources other than resources in kind. In other words, I'm allowed to use the classrooms for free, I'm allowed to use their technology for free, but there's no financial support for the Pro-Life Center. And on that, we rely on donors to pay for things like the printing costs for our amicus brief to the United States Supreme Court. In Dobbs, I actually was lead counsel on a brief for 280 women.
Yes, you were.
And Governor Kristi Noem was our lead on that, our lead amici. And so that brief argued that, in fact, abortion does not advance the interest of women. That's one of the lies that's been told by the abortion industry long before 1973 with Roe versus Wade. But in 1973, the Supreme Court of the United States wrote it into law. It was several decades after that that the Minnesota Supreme Court wrote into our law a belief that abortion is a fundamental right. Now, I think it's important for people watching this video to understand that in that particular case, Doe v. Gomez,
That's right, okay.
the Attorney General for the state simply did not contest whether the state constitution had a right to abortion inherent in it. And the simple fact is there's nothing in Minnesota history.
That's right, nothing in the Constitution explicitly, nothing in Minnesota history. So where did they get this idea that somehow we have a fundamental right to abortion in Minnesota, in the Doe v. Gomez case?
It was really a very odd case. It was a case in which a group of women and members of the abortion industry, doctors, clinics, wanted to ensure government funding for abortion, something that the United States Supreme Court rejected a few years earlier before Doe v. Gomez. And in that case, in what I think is just a remarkable failure to represent the interests of the people, again, the government was the defendant, the state attorney general was the lawyer for the state of Minnesota, and he simply conceded that there was this right to abortion written into the Constitution, and the only thing that the court really needed to confront was whether or not that right had to be funded, the exercise of that right had to be funded through state funds. What's really interesting about that is we have lots of rights that under the state constitution, authentic rights, like the right to religion that's explicitly within the text. The government's not obligated to fund the repairs on the cathedral or the building of a new church or pastors' salaries. Now, colonial times, we weren't a colony, but nonetheless, there were a couple of states where they actually paid pastors' salaries. But that's not true under the First Amendment and not true under the Minnesota Constitution. So this idea that because Minnesota was paying for prenatal care and to assist young mothers, that we necessarily had to pay for the abortion if that was the woman's choice. The majority opinion in that case, and there was an excellent dissent, but the majority opinion in that case said it is false that we're providing funding for abortion on demand for low-income women. In fact, this is only therapeutic abortions. But as you know and I know, and it was said out loud at a recent legislative hearing here in the state, that the Department of Health has taken on the position, Department of Human Services, that any abortion for a low-income woman is therapeutic in nature, and therefore there are no constraints. And the dissent was right. This is abortion on demand paid for by taxpayers.
So, I mean, and you've written about this before, that the abortion industry is treated differently than, even if you wanted to call it a medical service, it's treated differently even within the own sphere of medicine. Can you talk about how abortion is kind of an outlier, maybe even given special privileges in some circumstances?
Oh, there's no question. And in fact, at another hearing this legislative session, the CEO of Planned Parenthood admitted upon questioning by one of the legislators that abortion clinics are completely unregulated. Nail salons are regulated in this state. I can't go get a manicure without it being subject to regulation by the health department. And yet abortion clinics are not. And so we see the sort of abuses that were found, at least in other states, like Kermit Gosnell, who was actually, after killing a number of women and babies, was convicted of murder because he was completely unregulated. Now, that case is particularly egregious because the clinics were supposed to be regulated. And the governor said, well, that's a barrier to women's access, so we're just not going to enforce those laws. Here, we don't even have regulations, so they're not even put to that problem. We do have other types of regulations, like a requirement that where a young girl is seeking an abortion, that both parents have to be notified. Now, there's some exceptions. If the young girl says that she's the victim of abuse, notification's not required. There are a couple of other exceptions. But in that instance, the Attorney General in a recent case called Doe v. Minnesota,
I'm glad you got to this.
in a recent case called Doe v. Minnesota, the Attorney General's office filed what's called an affidavit or a declaration. In other words, it's a sworn statement that the Attorney General's office has never enforced any of the limitations of an abortion in this state, nor have they investigated them. And so it's really, it explains to some degree why Minnesota is an abortion destination. We are providing abortions that other states have said are unsafe for women, that the child is developed enough that we will not tolerate a direct attack on his life, which is exactly what abortion is. And the Attorney General for the state now and the governor have both announced that they want to increase our abortion tourism, that we want to make sure that we can attract women from all over the country and even pay for their abortions and time off while they're getting their abortions and traveling. And it really...
and really up the ante now that we're surrounded in the Midwest by many states that are the exact opposite, or that see that abortion isn't an answer to women's problem or family flourishing at all. We will be an outlier if the legislation that you've referred to, that we can talk more about in a little bit, if that actually passes. We will be one of the most extreme abortion states in the country, abortion destination. Using taxpayer money for abortions is just astounding. And this is so inconsistent, as we know, with 70% of Minnesotans. They do not want a radical overhaul of the protective laws with respect to abortion.
Well, actually, there are two paths to that dreadful future. And as I mentioned, I'm representing a group, Mothers Offering Maternal Support, in Ramsey County, which is where St. Paul is. I actually represent the organization itself.
That's right.
So, and the organization is limited to Minnesota moms who have minor daughters. That's daughters under the age of 18. That is something that viewers of this, if they are Minnesota moms with young daughters, they absolutely should learn more about Mothers Offering Maternal Support. These brave ladies in this Minnesota case learned that the district court in Ramsey County had struck down basically all the Minnesota laws regulating abortion on the request of an abortion doctor, a nurse who wants to provide abortions, and a private abortion funding. In this instance, what the court did is it had these plaintiffs come in and they challenged parents' right to be notified if their minor daughter's having an abortion. The plaintiffs challenged whether abortions should be performed by physicians or physicians in training. They wanted to open it up to any, and it's unclear. It looks like when they say healthcare practitioner, that definition could include podiatrists, opticians. So it's not at all clear what the limitations are. And then they also wanted to eliminate any felony criminal penalties. They wanted to eliminate mandatory reporting on injuries that are suffered during abortions or just the basic demographic characteristics of the women obtaining abortion. Now, this is regular data that the state collects in all sorts of settings to make sure that the healthcare system is working correctly. And I'm not suggesting that I think the abortion industry is part of the healthcare system, but that is the premise of the abortion industry and their advocates. And so just basic data, how many abortions are occurring in the state? How many abortions are occurring weeks 20 forward? How many gestation? How many abortions are we performing that are medical or chemical abortions with the drugs? How many abortions are we performing that have surgical requirements? But it's an important thing to know. And this idea that the vast majority of abortions are because women have health issues, it's just not borne out by the reasons that are given to the Minnesota Health Department. We need to know that. We need to know how to provide assistance so that families can flourish, as you said. Yet there's a bill going through the legislature right now that I've testified on, and you have too, several times, where the proponents of this bill, the folks trying to pass this bill, say, well, this data can be accessed by abortion researchers or healthcare researchers. What they really mean is that Planned Parenthood can publish what they want to publish, but someone like myself who wants to go in and look at the data will have zero access. Zero access. Without the requirement that they provide this data to the government, anybody that disagrees with their agenda will be denied access, and we've seen that time and time again.
Yep, you've also written on that too, the inaccuracies of the reporting data and just the inaccessibility of even getting this data, and so we can't have a compare and contrast because we don't really have a full slate of data in front of us.
Right,
So
right.
I think that's extremely problematic.
The New York Times has been heralded, and we had to deal with it in our Supreme Court briefs. A study out of that was driven through California called the Turnaway Study that supposedly proves that women suffer tremendous ill effects if they are turned away from an abortion economically, their lives become chaotic, et cetera. Well, number one, they won't release the raw data to anyone outside of their authors or someone sympathetic to the industry. So there's no way to get access to look. Number two, even as they report it, the number of women, it was supposed to be a longitudinal study, the number of women who were recruited and who initially accepted the invitation to participate dropped off dramatically. And so their sample size gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Right. They don't have access to the economic information that they, speculate would be the outcome.
But yet we're making these critical policy decisions based on, as you said, narrower data.
To read the Star Tribune story about it or the New York Times story about it, you'd think that this was, gold-plated research, and it's absolutely not. And even the abortion industry, in its more honest moments, admits that the data is problematic. The best data we can get on abortion, frankly, is coming out of Europe.
We've got these laws that have passed. Some people might know the name Senate File 1 and House File 1, which were intentionally named as the #1 priority to create a fundamental right to abortion here. And then we've got this other Doe v. Minnesota case that is trying to really ramp up the Doe v. Gomez decision. So not only a fundamental right to abortion, but repealing all of the health and safety protections. And then enter moms, where this group of moms says, this isn't okay. I have fundamental rights here. I'm a parent, and I can't imagine that, as you said, my daughter can't get her ears pierced. She can't go on a field trip, but she can get an abortion, and I won't know about it. And the complications that could result from that are just incredible. And what is a parent to do? They might think that their daughter's just, maybe having a bad period, when in fact she's had an abortion without their knowledge. Who's going to advocate for her? So you're representing this group of moms that is in the courts trying to intervene, and maybe you can explain more about what that looks like, trying to enter this lawsuit to have these rights vindicated. And maybe you can talk about what that might hopefully do with respect to the laws that we know that are in question right now. Will that restore them? And how does this all piece together? Because there's a lot going on in our state.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, this abortion doctor and a nurse who wants to do abortion in this abortion funding group came in to challenge these laws 3 years ago.
Yes.
And fairly quickly after that, a couple of organizations, Pro-Life Action Ministries came in and said, we've been involved. They also want to get rid of the fetal disposition law, the law that requires that when an abortion's been done, that the baby either be buried or incinerated. which actually is critical given that we know that there is an industry in aborted fetal baby parts. We know that the University of Minnesota participates in that. I've seen an invoice where they were ordering an organ that had to be at least 16 weeks or older in gestational stage. So Pro-Life Action Ministries came in and said, we'd like to help defend this law. The Attorney General said, I don't need any help. And the judge said, the Attorney General's doing fine, and no, we're not going to let you in the case.
So these plaintiffs sued the state. The Attorney General is supposed to defend the laws that are on the books, which would include the ones that you just talked about, parental notification, informed consent, waiting periods, hospitals,
mandatory reporting,
physician only, all these things that we think are just consumer protections, basically.
Right.
We wouldn't agree that abortion is healthcare, but we would at least want some safeguards around it like any other part of the medical industry. So the Attorney General is tasked with defending those, and you're saying that these groups like Pro-Life Action Ministry have said, wait a minute, we don't think you're doing that, so we need to be a part of this lawsuit.
And I think they also said, independent of whether you're doing it, two heads are better than one.
True.
Let us in. We've got a very talented lawyer, a lawyer who had gone all the way up to the United States Supreme Court and won. And the judge said no, because both the plaintiffs and defendants, and that ought to tip people off, both the plaintiffs and defendants said, no, we don't want anybody else to play. So then the Minnesota Senate, when it had a Republican majority, and this shouldn't be a partisan issue, so please, but the Republican majority, they said, well, we want to come in and help defend the laws that we passed. And again, the judge said, I think the Attorney General is doing a fine job. Both plaintiffs and defendants objected. And so the judge said, no, you have no evidence that he's done anything wrong. Well, fast forward 3 years. And the judge's opinion comes down, it strikes down parental involvement, it strikes down the hospitalization requirement, it strikes down physician only, waiting periods, informed consent. It does leave intact the majority of the mandatory reporting law, okay? It's an 80-page opinion on Westlaw, and it's a complex opinion. It's clear that the judge spent a lot of time thinking about this, but frankly, because of the conduct of the Attorney General and the governor and the state officials in this case, his hands were tied. Not once, not twice, 12 times in the opinion, the judge says, defendants presented no evidence, defendants presented no evidence, defendants presented no evidence. Or he says, plaintiffs' unrebutted evidence, which to non-lawyers means defendants presented no evidence.
So there was nothing for him to rely on to determine that perhaps the laws are constitutional. That you're saying that any of the evidence, which would be expert opinions that the Attorney General had submitted to defend the laws, were essentially deficient.
That's exactly right. The plaintiffs in this case came in and made statements that, having done abortion litigation for years, I was Special Assistant Attorney General for Oklahoma. I represented all of the state district attorneys in Kansas in a case regarding abortion. You come to expect that the abortion industry is going to say that abortion is great and there are no adverse consequences and parents are evil, or if they're not evil, the girl's going to tell them anyway, so you don't need this law, and that no girl's ever sexually abused by an adult. And I mean, they make these claims like the one they made in this case, which is that teenagers have the exact same decisional capacity as adult women. The whole legal setup it denies this. We have juvenile justice courts because the U.S. Supreme Court has declared, consistent with the facts, that teenagers are impulsive. They do not have the same decision-making capacity that adults do. And yet the Attorney General filed no evidence disputing that.
So as you're saying, there's no evidence presented in this case to defend the parental notification law, despite the fact that the entire legal system is set up to protect minors from being vulnerable and making these impulsive decisions. We know that parents have the best interests of their children in mind. And in fact, we know that the Minnesota legislature recognized that when they passed the parental notification law with bipartisan support. So to me, I've been watching this case and I've just been astounded that there's even a challenge to a law that was supported by majority of Minnesotans.
This is a case where the Attorney General, because he provided no evidence, never went to trial. The last time our parental notice laws were at issue, it was then Attorney General Hubert Humphrey. There was a 5-week trial just on parental notice. It was vigorously defended. He took it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and he won. This Attorney General provided 2 expert reports, not even affidavits, not even declarations, nonetheless, one of which said none of these laws have any effect. Same number of girls are getting an abortion, so you can't say it's a real problem for anybody. That was their big defense. Or, well, the U.S. Supreme Court has already upheld these. States are free to interpret their constitution differently than the federal constitution. And in Minnesota, that's exactly what the Minnesota Supreme Court did in Doe v. Gomez. Right. The defense is completely deficient. And so we are trying to intervene. We have asked the court to let us in. Once again, both the plaintiff and the defendant are objecting and saying that we're too late to the party, that the case was adequately defended, that it would create too big a burden on the plaintiff to actually have to defend the case as it should have been done. And we had a hearing early January. The judge has 90 days to issue a ruling. The hearing went for 2 hours. It was open to the public via Zoom. It was a vigorous inquiry by the judge. He asked lots of good questions, lots of important questions to both sides. I'm guardedly optimistic. Lawyer learns quickly never to say for sure what a judge is going to rule. But the simple fact is that this representation on the part of the defendants was basically not representation. And these Minnesota moms have a statutory right to notice on their daughter's intent, as do their dads. And if we are allowed into the case, we've already presented the judge 10 expert declarations, one of which runs 80 pages. We've done our homework. We're ready to defend these laws.
So we have these kind of, like I said, concurrent tracks where we've got things going on at the courts, but then while we have this case that we're awaiting the judge's decision, we've got things happening at the legislature where they've passed, as we referenced earlier, Senate File 1 and House File 1, this fundamental right to abortion. And then we have the Senate File 70 and House File 1, which I've called the how-to bill, which is, the mechanics of how do we give a fundamental right to abortion? What do you think might happen? My understanding of Doe v. Gomez is that it never said that abortion cannot have some regulations and parameters, just like any other, quote, medical care, which I don't think abortion is medical care, but if we're treating it as such, it's regulated, hopefully, like any other medical procedure.
And there are huge concerns. It puts young girls at risk. In Minnesota, I was shocked to learn that the Twin Cities is 13 in the nation in child prostitution. 13, okay? We're 3rd in human trafficking. So there are young girls out there, there are adult women out there that are being coerced to have sex, that become pregnant, and those who have coerced them are demanding that they get an abortion. Without these protections of informed consent, a reflection period, parental involvement, we will not be able to fight the scourge of these sorts of sex crimes. And it's astonishing to me that this is something that Iron Range Democrats are being bullied into voting for. I mean, these are common sense protections, and as you noted earlier, historically, Republicans and Democrats can come together on some of these things. And as far as the fundamental right, the U.S. Supreme Court, even under Roe v. Wade, said parental involvement is constitutional with certain limitations. They upheld informed consent. They upheld reporting requirements. They upheld pretty much everything that this district court struck down, not necessarily because the judge was persuaded that's what the law meant, but because the government officials didn't present a defense. Right. I get a little worked up about this.
No, Teresa, I'm so glad you came in today. Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge. I appreciate all of your work on the front lines in the court, testifying at the legislature. It is just really invaluable, all of your experience and just your care. I know that you're not doing this because it's just, it is fun for you academically, and I know that it stimulates your mind, but I know that you really have a love for women and for children and for flourishing families, and I really admire you for that. I'm thankful to be your friend, and I'm thankful for our relationship. We've really been able to rally around some important issues in our state. So thank you again for coming, and appreciate all that you're doing here on the front lines in Minnesota.
Brian, thank you so much for joining me here today. I am honored that we are having this conversation. You are the Executive Director of Pro-Life Action Ministries, which has been saving children for so many years from the atrocity of abortion. I'm so grateful that you're here with me. So you have been out there witnessing to abortion-minded women for over 40 years in your capacity. You and I know that every single situation is different. Because every single woman is different. Mm-hmm. Every single woman who undergoes an unintended pregnancy is in a different and unique situation. But I'm wondering if you can tell me what the general fears are that women face who undergo unintended pregnancies.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of differences, mm-hmm. but there's a lot of commonality as well. And most often, it is fear that drives a woman to be there. And usually, as is the case with fear, it's a false thing. Yeah. It's easily overcome. Which is what we end up doing. But most often it's concerns about being able to complete school if they're in college, concerns about whether they're ready to be able to raise children or not, concerns about finances. Those type of false fears are often driving the woman to go have an abortion.
What are other key factors that women who undergo unintended pregnancies face?
Well, often the driving factor to be at an abortion facility is the man. Unfortunately. So oftentimes we're seeing it anecdotally when we're out there, we're hearing it in the surveys and the responses that are being done by some national groups, and it's clear that oftentimes women are there because they're being coerced to some degree. And so instead of being there of their own free accord, they're being pressured to have the abortion.
Yeah, so given all of these factors and there's more factors, but these are the main ones that you've seen in over 40 years of your life-saving work, what would you say is the number one message that women need to hear? That
there's help available. There's free help available. It's widely available. We have pregnancy help centers all over the area, and at most of the abortion facilities very close to the location of those places. So letting the woman know that help is available, letting them know that people care, letting them know that we care about her as well as the baby, and that we can answer whatever issues, problems, difficulties, situations they find themselves in.
Wow. So can you share maybe one story with me of an abortion-minded woman who ended up choosing life?
Well, yeah, I'll try.
There's so many, so just choose one.
Here's the easiest one I ever had. This was probably a few years ago now, but this woman was walking up the street toward the mega Planned Parenthood in St. Paul, which is kind of unusual. It's almost always drive-in traffic. But as she was walking up the street, I went out and greeted her down the sidewalk a ways and just entered into a quick conversation with her. She admitted she was there for an abortion. She had other children, and she wasn't married to the man that had her pregnant. So I started talking to her and started asking her about this guy. I mean, would he be there for her? I think I asked her if he would help change diapers and help feed the baby. And she's saying yes to all these things. I said, then why are you here? And she admitted that she didn't need to be there, and she decided not to have the abortion right there.
Wow. I've heard from so many women that are post-abortive that it really is all they needed was a friendly face, like a Brian Gibson coming in and saying, you can do this. Yeah. You are strong enough. You can do this, and we will stand with you.
Smiling is the hardest thing to do in front of an abortion facility, and it's the most important thing to do when you're trying to interact with a woman.
Absolutely. So people are watching and they're listening to what we're saying. How can people get involved in witnessing to abortion-minded women right now?
Go to PLAM.org, PLAM.org, our website, and the information on how to get involved is there. We do offer training. We actually would prefer that they go through our training before going out there. We can do on-the-site training as well, but we have classroom training and so forth. It's not a science, but there's a lot of information we've gained over the decades of doing this that help be better at doing this.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me here today, Brian.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jennifer, it's so great to be with you today. You're joining me from Options East for Women, a center that serves many women who need prenatal care. And I'm just wondering, can you tell us more about these services and more about Options East?
Great, I'd love to. Thank you for having me here. Options for Women East is located on the east side of St. Paul on Wiper Avenue. We exist to serve women that are dealing with unplanned pregnancies or anything within that pregnancy journey. We provide pregnancy testing, limited ultrasounds, education, any material assistance, but one of the cool things we've started about 10 years ago is our full prenatal program. So when a woman has an ultrasound and they choose parenting in that room, we are able to provide all of the services they need up until delivery and postpartum. Wow. So we have volunteer doctors that come in, provide all of the doctors' appointments, their testing, their labs, anything around there. We really try to give it holistic health so that we are dealing with physical, emotional, and spiritual needs.
So you just said all of your doctors are volunteers. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I think that's incredible.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
We have pro-life doctors that come in after their full day with their practice, and they volunteer on their day off after work, and they give the time to those patients that need it. So they are able to get a bigger experience. These are moms that are making really hard decisions. They are usually single moms. They come from maybe very little support. Their housing is unstable, and they just need more. So between my licensed staff and those volunteer doctors, they're able to receive that.
Wow, and do women need to pay anything to be able to get these services at your clinic?
Everything that happens inside the clinic is no cost.
Wow, that is incredible. And you serve as the executive director, so can you tell us a little bit more about your role as executive director and even what led you to Options East and helping to serve women in these situations?
Sure. I've been there almost 9 years as executive director, and it's been a wild ride. This isn't one of those jobs you look for, right? That you kind of check the box and go, that's exactly what I'm going to do when I grow up. God puts you on a path and leads you there, and I'm sure every director has their story of that too. But in college, I got pregnant. I was one of those statistics and had that moment of decision of where do I go? I mean, I was brought up Catholic. I was pro-life.
And how old were you at that time?
I was 19.
Wow, okay.
I knew where the abortion clinic was because there was only one, and I had prayed in front of it with my family. So that moment is really tough because you have to really figure out where your values and beliefs align and if you're convicted for them. So that moment of decision, my boyfriend, now husband, basically just said, no.
Boyfriend, now husband.
Boyfriend, now husband.
Incredible.
So we just don't do that. That is, I'm going to stand by you, and that's something we don't do.
So you found out you were pregnant, and then you had a conversation about whether abortion was on the table and was an option.
Absolutely. Even though you think I'm not that person, I would never make that decision, right?
Right. And I assume that being in that situation, you can probably relate to the women that come in your clinic all the more because you yourself had those same thoughts going on in your mind.
It is a very hard personal decision to make. And to be in that moment, I feel for anyone who has to deal with that. They sell abortion as the easy ticket out. If I have the abortion, then everything in my life will be perfect. Everything else will fall into place. And I think that's the lie they sell, is that if I do this, everything else will turn out fine. And we know that that's not true. Right. So in that moment, I do have to say it was hard. Choosing to parent was hard. We were young, but we had great support around us, and that's what we want to give to the women who come to the clinic. We give them that love, that support, that family around them throughout the whole journey.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people in Minnesota are just learning about pregnancy resource centers and pregnancy medical clinics. You had mentioned that Options East is a pregnancy medical clinic. Can you tell us kind of what it's like on a daily basis there? I'm sure there's no typical day, but help us understand what happens in the morning, what goes on throughout the rest of the day, and what's it like at the end of the day?
No, it's so great. So we have medically trained licensed RNs that meet with our patients for pregnancy testing, STI testing, and treatment.
Okay, so very comprehensive services that you're offering.
Limited ultrasounds. We might be doing intake for prenatal care. We might be running labs. But on the other side, too, we also have education coaches that work with pregnancy and parenting education.
Oh, tell me more about the education coaches.
Sure.
What do they do? And who
anything you would want to know. We want to make sure that you are ready and prepared for this pregnancy. So anything that could happen during pregnancy, anything that could happen afterwards with parenting, we'd like to keep them around, have their baby postpartum, come on back. We'd love to educate you some more. And with that, we put resources around that. So say you come in for a car seat class.
Yeah.
Come in for a car seat class, you'll earn a car seat. come in for safe sleep, then you'll earn a pack and play. So we want to be able to put that education with the pieces that you need to provide safety for that child.
So you're providing these women not only with emotional resources, but and mental health resources, you're also providing them with physical resources. You mentioned car seats, pack and plays. I'm sure there's lots of other things and services that you provide for that, and that is so critical because that's the way that we can help create a culture of life when we are providing what these women need. So that's really
absolutely
exciting. Has there been any surprises along your journey as the executive director? Even maybe a story you might want to share that helps you kind of think, this is a hard life, but I'm going to keep at it every day?
Well, we are super blessed. I mean, there's so many things that do come up and that God just puts himself right in there and you see his work being done. Our very first baby that was born in the prenatal program, kid you not, was born on Mother's Day. I mean, that's just, you can't make that up. That's just amazing. And that's just kind of how it flourished from there. And we have had so many women come in and say, oh my gosh, I don't know how I would have done this without you. When we let them know what's happening with the center, they can't believe it.
What are the things that they think have been the most critical needs that have been met for them at the center?
I think it's just that we're meeting them where they are. So we're not asking them to come to us. We're asking, they're coming in, and we might be meeting them in a broken relationship, unstable housing, addiction, some really dark places, and we're meeting them there.
So those counselors would address even those areas of addiction and other things that influence their life as a mother and their pregnancy.
We've had prenatal patients that are in rehab, that are in shelters, that are couch hopping, in all different situations. And we're trying to use the resources we have around us to fill those voids while we're trying to take care of that medical piece.
Do you see an increase in stability for these women when you first meet them and then when they leave?
It's so great to see them like day one and then see them postpartum afterwards really thriving. It's amazing.
How long has Options East been in Minnesota and been in the White Bear area?
Sure. We have been on White Bear Avenue for over 33 years.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing. We have been there a very long time. And with that, we've had so many people say, oh my gosh, I remember coming here back in the day. Or we're really well known by word of mouth. We have this beautiful big sign, if you've ever driven on White Bear Avenue. And that has really been the ticket for us, is that people know that we're there and they trust us.
And how many staff do you have at the clinic?
I have 8.
8 staff. And then how many women do you estimate that you see on a yearly basis?
We serve over 300 women a year.
300 women.
Mm-hmm. We delivered 28 babies last year.
28. You delivered 28 babies in the clinic with volunteer doctors.
Yes.
And the women receive these services free of charge.
Yes.
What's holding you back from doing more and serving more women?
We're just limited by the number of doctors we have and funding. If we had more of both, this program could go anywhere. We could serve so many more women. We could add pieces to the program that we have yet to do.
What
that's
kind
really
of pieces is that? What does that look like?
Expand. We've always been looking for therapists, nutritionists, dietitians, things like that, to just expand those pieces that kind of fit right into the prenatal program with the medical.
That leads me to some other thoughts. We've talked a little bit about the Positive Alternative Grant and state funding for women and women in need in Minnesota. Can you tell me a little bit more about Options East and if there's a relationship with the Positive Alternatives Grant in Minnesota?
So the Positive Alternatives Grant was built for alternatives to abortion. With that, we decided to take that money, because that is my tax money, your tax money, that's my donor's tax money, and see if we can grow the program. And that's what we did. We put it towards a prenatal program, and we were able to grow it to where it is now. We started off pretty small because we knew there was a need. We just weren't sure how to fill it. Mm-hmm. And as that kept happening, more and more things needed to come in-house. Mm-hmm. And so we've built the program to where it is today, where almost everything's in-house. Mm-hmm. And they get to come back to that clinic for all of their needs. Mm-hmm. It's quite amazing. Delivery obviously happens at the hospital, but everything else happens in that clinic. Mm-hmm. By taking away that funding, you are taking away the chances for these women who are uninsured or underinsured to have this ability to have prenatal care. This is an absolute crisis in the state of Minnesota. These women don't have insurance. They have barriers to getting it or even finding out how to get it. So we work with them to get their insurance by the time they deliver. These are all things that happen throughout the pregnancy. I do have to say, one goal when we started this that wasn't on the table that has actually happened, They come in without insurance or primary care physician. They don't understand health care. They go to the ER for all their needs. Once we've connected them to the prenatal program, they have then followed that physician to their primary clinic and have stayed with them. We're talking years after. So we've fixed, for at least that one person at a time, that healthcare need and crisis, that they are getting what they're supposed to have. So the idea that everyone is taken care of and has insurance and has a primary doctor is not true. That is something that totally needs to be dealt with. And again, one person at a time during a pregnancy, because they have to be seen. Otherwise, these women go undoctored and deliver at the ER. We are taking care of that one patient at a time.
So through the Positive Alternatives Grant, you're able to take care of these women and their children one patient at a time.
Yes.
And you've made a significant impact by giving them the stability of healthcare that they wouldn't otherwise have.
Huge.
If you didn't have the resources because of this grant.
Yes.
So it's clear that the Positive Alternatives Grant has made a huge difference for Options East.
Absolutely.
We also chatted a little bit about people's perception of pregnancy resource centers and pregnancy medical clinics. I know you recently shared a little bit in the news about your experience when you learned that our Attorney General said that clinics like yours and even pregnancy resource centers were not servicing women and were actually lying and were in some ways fraudulent. How did that make you feel when you heard that?
Well, the hardest part about that is that no one has come to my clinic, no one has called me, emailed me, texted me, and asked any of those questions. So for them to have all these answers, I'm not quite sure where they got that information. I think that's the hardest part of this, is that we show up to serve these women every day, and yet they're putting lies out there that are not founded. I mean, had they come into my clinic and found something, that would be different. There's been no communication, and it's story after story after story of all these lies, and they keep just telling the same story over and over, and people don't want to look any further. So they see that tagline and go, oh my gosh, crisis pregnancy centers? Oh no, we can't have anything to do with them. How dare they get funding? You know nothing about us, but you're not asking either.
So this is a false narrative. Do you think it's built to create fear so that people won't utilize the resources that you and others have in the state of Minnesota?
Absolutely. They're fearful of us because we believe in something else.
And what is that?
Is that all life exists and all life matters.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's been great to be with you today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
When I first started the program, I was, explaining to Luke how impactful it was to just have, a voice and two ears to, talk to me and listen to me.
After going through it, I've learned that it's the approach of not forcing anything, not making a decision based off somebody else's thoughts and desires. It really makes it something that you want to desire more for yourself.
Something I learned from the informational videos would probably be like the seriousness of living conditions, habits, controlling your habits and eliminating negative or bad habits.
I guess the biggest thing is learning how to help me control my anger, helping me find ways that I didn't know about before to progress further as a human, not just as a father, but kind of take care of some of my personal issues.
I think one major takeaway for me would be, how could I put this? Be a part of something that's obviously, a foundation. It has, values and morals and, codes to follow. How helpful it's been to, have others, impact my life and my kids' life. That alone is something I got out of this program.
I got to learn more about myself and kind of accept certain things that have happened. There's always stressors and hard times, and I've got to say that I've learned to deal with those a little better.
I'm never going to fully be ready, but I can be prepared with all the necessary information.
If it weren't for this program being the way that it is, there's no chance I would have done it, and there's no chance I would have learned the things I have through it. So without those guys, those people, I wouldn't have had the eye-opening, life-enhancing experience I've had.
So Thank you. Appreciate you. Father of resilience. I don't back down from responsibilities, and I will continue to provide for my children and work hard for their future so they can have what they need to be successful in life. I want them to be able to go to college so they can be more educated, for they will need to take care of their children and bills one day as well. Teaching my children resilience, hard work, and dedication can go a long way. In addition, teaching respect and love will shape their future. So be mindful for what you are dishing out into the universe, because it's listening. Growing up, I didn't have any guidance, nor did I have any structure. My father wasn't there for me, and his father wasn't there for him. The cycle had to end. I made it my duty to be better than what I was handed, and I will continue to protect, acknowledge, and be the best father I could possibly be, no matter life's circumstances. Being a father to me is everything, and I couldn't imagine not sticking around to care for those I love most. Without them, there is no me. Over time, I've learned that with prayer, love, and a healthy environment, people can thrive. Put God first, focus on your family and health, and watch the growth happen naturally. My kids add so much more meaning to my life, as I explained. Without them, I know for a fact I wouldn't be who I am today. I am a good father.